Thank you very much, Noah. It's so nice to be here, and I'm really uh, very moved by this opportunity to share this space and time with my Upaya friends and all the audience. I'd like to thank you, Noah, and I still remember our walk in the Himalayas every time. I mean, it was the walk of a life, literally, in a sense. And I would like to thank Roshi Joan for being my teacher those last 9 years and many lives before, I'm sure. And also, I'd like to thank all the brothers at Upaya and all the residents and everybody who has been working during the pandemic for Upaya to be this safe place of practice. I would also like to thank the collegial group of the socially engaged Buddhist training I'm taking part, because they have made my practice go through a lot of change. And that's maybe the main reason I chose the title Dharma Hyper-Colonization Community Sewing at the Kitchen, in the Kitchen, as the title of this Dharma talk. I was talking with Noah before this event, but usually when I do this talk, Dharma talks in Portuguese at our temple, they are spontaneous. I mean, they are delivered like in our native rituals, in which people usually say that we are horses for the saints. So we transform that into horses for the Dharma. And so we can channel the Dharma during our talks. When I speak in English, I'm not sure I can be a good horse in that sense, but I'll try. And also, I'm going to show some slides at the end, but I would begin by saying that this talk is a sort of collective construction. Thich Nhat Hanh would say that, he said that the Buddha of the future, Maitreya, is really the Sangha. And we believe that community is the Buddha of the future. And so each one that you're going to see the photos of our Sangha. So you're going to understand that everybody took part in the building of this talk. It's really like a dance. Some people may be called teachers, some people may be called students. But who is the guest and who is the one who is the host, really? I mean, we can move those positions freely, and that is important for our practice. So just a word before beginning. The dress code, like Noah said, is important. And it's very interesting because usually the dress codes of Zen are imported from the extreme Orient, and that's traditional in a sense. But one of the motifs of this talk is to ask this question: can the Dharma really flourish in our lands here if they do not become native in that sense? Because there is a drama of colonization in these lands, and people were exterminated, and they are still exterminated in my country and in other countries of Latin America. Indians, people from African origin, and poor in general are suffering a policy of termination. And so this dress code here is like a celebration of the ancestors, of people who survived against all odds, against all possibilities, so that I could be here today. And as you said, I'm an MD, so I'm part of an elite in my country. And it's very sad that most of the people like me, we will suffer the process of brainwash to forget our origins. It's a process of whitening everything, which is very strange in a country that most of the people are colored. I mean, there are few people that were really white in that sense in Brazil. But everybody, many of us would consider themselves whites. And it's a surprise when you go to a foreign country and people don't think you're white. Then you begin to think, what am I really? So this is a headdress of the nation of my grandmother, Funio. And these things here are symbols of the religion of my father, Umbanda, or Candomblé, which is the native Afro-Brazilian religion. And each one of these means an initiation for a saint, Orixá. And so this mixture is just a priest, a priest in Brazil, in a sense. I was initiated in Candomblé, the Afro-Brazilian religion. I said my vows in front of Tokuda Roshi in the Zen tradition. And I am part of the nation of my grandmother. So I would, before another part of the talk, I would pay homage to the teacher, Bell Hooks, who passed the other margin today. And she was an inspiration for us. I mean, she lived in the United States and she was an activist of love. I mean, she was in the tradition of Martin Luther King, Thich Nhat Hanh, someone who believed in socially engaged practice, but also believed that if this practice does not emerge from love, it will not take us to any place. I mean, you can have like fierce compassion, but hate won't take us anywhere. And so I would like to do a small ritual in honor of Lady Bell Hooks. I will use a maraca. A maraca is an instrument that was used by the goddess to create human beings in the tradition of the Brazilian native Indians. So we can make it sing for her life, her eternal life, and thank her as our newest ancestor in that sense, because she's always going to be an activist of love for us. And we would say, Pitoneande Maranungara, which in the Tupi language means good evening, my relatives. You know, we people from indigenous origin, we call ourselves, everybody, relatives. In Portuguese, it's parentes. Parentes, it's like parents, but it comes from Latin. In Latin, parentes is really parents, like in English. But in Portuguese, by some reason, parentes became relatives. And so we call everybody a relative, a tree, a rock, a cloud, like Robert Frost would say, our relatives. And we also, it's interesting to remember that our peoples had a place that was called Api, which was the house of prayer. And every time you felt like some anxiety, you would go there and you would do what they called kiringatu. And kiringatu is Zazen in a sense, is to sit in silence. So it's very interesting because all those traditions point to the necessity of being able to sit and make silence so that we can access the real fountain of love of the universe. And just to illustrate what kind of situation we deal with here, there was a girl like at the end of the 19th century that was hunted, an Indian girl. She was hunted with dogs by a mixed blood guy who took her and raped her and then fell in love with her and married her. That was my grandmother. She was taken from the indigenous land, and she was Christianized. She got a baptism. She got a Christian name. But she never forgot the indigenous ways of praying, and she would teach the kids about them. And then her son married a 13-year-old girl from another descendant from another tribe. And that guy was my grandfather, who married my grandmother when she was 13. But my grandmother could teach her mother, her daughter, who is my mother, the ways of praying of the Indians mixed with Catholic prayers. It's very interesting because at that time, you see, there are many layers of spirituality that come together and mingle to make what we would call a Brazilian spirituality. Our world is an enchanted world. I mean, it's full of spirits and forces, and everything is around us. And so this woman, my mother, she got married to a boy, to a guy who was a son of Portuguese immigrants, my father. And funny, my father became a priest in the Afro-Brazilian religion, although he was purely Portuguese and a white man. But he became a priest in the Afro-Brazilian religion. So I got this kind of mixture of spiritual lives at home. And so I learned that even though life could be harsh and aggressive for everybody, you should not forget your link with this fountain. So it's very interesting because when I began my own search, I looked for many places, and I finally found some kind of home at the Zen practice. It was wonderful because it had silence, it had discipline, it could help me settle in my position. And it helped me a lot in my profession as a psychiatrist and also working with palliative care colleagues as a psychiatrist in that field. But at the same time, I always felt somewhat strange because this Zen world was so different from everything that I had experienced as a child, as an adolescent. And to tell you the truth, I missed the magic. I missed the enchantment of my native world. So what happened during the pandemic was very interesting. At the beginning of the pandemic, as I'm a kind of sort of old guy, I came to this refuge in the middle of the mountains. It's like 160 kilometers from Rio, in the middle of an Atlantic rainforest. So I live here with 2 dogs, basically, and I have nice neighbors. My music teacher is my neighbor near here. I have another Zen priest who's the owner of a pousada, an eco lodge near here. So I'm not really totally alone. And I had to go to Rio, the big city where the temple is, once a week because I had to go to a hospital and see patients with COVID and things like that. But most of the time I stayed here and worked online. So I had some kind of 1.5 years of retreat, which remembered me of Noah in his retreat in the refuge in the mountain. But of course, it was not so harsh as his because I had those friends here. But anyway, I could feel a lot about the connection with the forest, the connection with the trees, the birds whom I feed every morning, the dogs. And then I began feeling a sense of reconnection. And interestingly, the nation of my grandmother, the Funio, they contacted me at that time, but not because they knew my story, but because they needed help because of COVID. And we had friends in common. And then we began like a movement to send food, money, medicine to them. They live far from Rio. I mean, they live like 2,000 kilometers to the northeast, in the northeast of Brazil. And then by grace, I could make contact with the nation of my grandmother again. And so that's where I got the headdress and the maraca, and I could feel part of it again. Of course, you can see those drawings on my skin, tattoos, and you would say, well, do the Funio tattoo themselves? No, they don't tattoo themselves. They paint themselves a lot. But, painting is not it's not a very useful thing if you live in the city and you go to the hospital. So I had to do tattoos. That's the way to make like permanent inking of the skin. And also those tattoos remind me, they are symbolic of the journey on the underworld, the rebirth. I mean, there's a lot of things here, and someday maybe we can make a talk about the symbolics of tattoos here. But to continue, this kind of retreat made it possible for us at ANG, the temple that I am the coordinator, to rethink our practice. Since the beginning, we went virtual too. It's not big like Upaya, but it works. I mean, we still have daily practice from Tuesdays to Saturdays, 2 times a day. We have Dharma talks, we have shared meditation. And so many more people came to our practice than it used to be at the presential temple in Rio, because our temple is in a favela. It's called, favela is like a community of poor people. Né? I think you might know the word. Usually they are in our city, they are located on the hills in the midst of the city. So they are many are dangerous places because sometimes there are wars between drug dealers and the police. But nowadays, it's more or less calm after the COVID pandemic. But it's still a place where people are, we don't call them vulnerable because they are already vulnerated. I mean, it's not a possibility. It's already there. People live, I mean, you can imagine living in a place where there is no sewage, where there is no public services. It's really terrible. But something interesting happens in those places. People have a real sense of community, which is absent in most parts of the big city. So it's interesting. I was talking with a nice person minutes before this talk. And we were talking that, for example, in the biggest favela in Rio de Janeiro, Rocinha, there are 200,000, 250,000 people living there. I'm going to show some photos. But in the biggest favela, there is a voluntary group, an NGO called Compassive Care, and they give voluntary palliative care to the people who live there. But they are trained by the best specialists in Brazil who help those people be trained as the best palliative care caregivers. So it's interesting. Sometimes you don't have money, you live in the worst condition, and you have the best palliative care you can have. And some people who can pay for palliative care go to places that are, although are hospitals, are not that good. So in the midst of samsara, you can find nirvana. Thich Nhat Hanh also talked about that. He says that we live in nirvana, but unfortunately, we don't know how to recognize it. I mean, we don't acknowledge the presence of nirvana, although it's always here. And so what happens is that we began talking and practicing this virtual space, and then we felt that it was time to make the Dharma less colonial and more native. It means that we want to be like the kitchen people in Brazil. You know, Brazil is a place that used to have slaves. And there was a very big difference between what we call the big house, Casa Grande was the name of the seat of the owner, and the senzala, which was the slave's place. And most of the slaves would go to the kitchen because they would make the food, they would be the nannies, they would take care of cleaning. And after the what they call the abolition here, I mean, the end of slavery, which was in 1888, the situation didn't get much different. Only the name changed. People were not called slaves. They're called underpaid workers. They're called oppressed people. They are called homeless people. So, of course, the name slaves not here anymore, but the situation is not very bad. And so it's important that we understand that the kitchen is the most important part of the house. It's the place where food comes from. And food has to be made with love. Food has to be, for it to nourish people, it has to be made with love. And so these mostly colored people who work in the kitchen, like cooks and nannies, they really took care of us, most of us. So in this country, it's important now that we understand that the kitchen is not a place to be despised in that sense. And then we perceive that, in a sense, to live in a country which is not one of the central powers, it's like to live in the kitchen of the world. We produce most of the food that the world eats. We produce the minerals. We produce everything. We are in Africa, and this kind of situation. So we are the kitchen in the world, and there is an expression in Portuguese that is nowadays not used anymore, because if you use it, you are going to be cancelled. But many people think that way, but they don't say it anymore. When you used to see someone who was colored, like an Indian or black person, you would say, if that person was a doctor and educated person, they would say, oh, it's a colored person, but has a white soul. And that was a very common way of referring to people who were in that situation. So now it's important that we acknowledge the fact that these people have been oppressed, raped, and disinherited of their lands. But now it's the time to give value, to put real worth in the food they make, the children they grow, the houses they clean, the country they take care. And for us, it's important that our practice, our Dharma practice, does not become another layer of colonization, but becomes a freedom practice, a practice that makes us free from these prejudices, a practice that makes us engage in the good thing, in the good side of life here, that is community. It's a practice that should include our native nature, because it's a happy nature, it's a joyful nature. The Dharma has not to be a sullen and melancholic thing. It should be happy, it should be joyful. It should deal with the transience of things, of course, life and death. I work with that. But we need not be melancholic about that. So the kitchen we want to build is a kitchen that can be the most important part of the house, and a part that is full of love, and a part of the house that can welcome everybody. I think that the real globalization of the Dharma is not that everybody should learn Japanese or Tibetan or dress in any kind of dress code that they don't want to dress. I mean, the globalization of Dharma is that we may find ourselves in a brotherhood where we can recognize our common practice and give value to our cultural differences as values as an essence of singularity. That's interesting, because sometimes people talk about the ego as something bad or evil, but our egos brought us here together. Our egos make us be able to talk and have a conversation. The problem is when we get too much attached to those egos and too much attached to one style of culture. There is a very good book of Chimamanda Adichie. I mean, it's in Portuguese here, but the title of the book is The Danger of a Single Story, History. If you have only one history to tell people. She's a very nice author from Nigeria. And she writes about that. And that's really our idea. Even in our country, we need to be respectful of all the stories or histories that are here, like mine or everybody else. So we should include all this in the Dharma. I think it's a challenge. There is another author, very good, Ailton Krenak. He's a Brazilian Indian. And this book is very good. It's called Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. And it's very interesting because he talks about the capacity to talk to trees, birds, animals, and to postpone the end of this world. Although he talks with some sadness about the end of the world in the 16th century, when many Indians, a lot of Indians were killed by the epidemics that the white people brought from Europe when they arrived. Some people forget that we don't need wars to exterminate people. You can just bring the bacteriological war that was brought in the 16th century. But the thing is, with all these sad things and sad situations, we can find some solace in our capacity of meeting our love fountain, the source of love inside us. So I think that the Dharma can be this here. I would like to share some slides here. Let me see if I cannot do that, it's Noah's fault. Oh, I think you have to activate my
since Sarah, can you make him a co-host because you're the host, please?
Great. Thank you. So it's okay, Noah? You can see it? So that's our Sangha. They helped me. We talked about the situation. So here we have some of the members of our Sangha. And as you can see, I can also use dress codes from the 13th century in Japan. But it's not. I do not have anything against them. It's just that we can make use of a lot of dress codes. You can see here, this is canon, a black canon that was made by a black sculptor who is also a priest. This is an Indian deity, Jaquacana. This is Shango, which is an Orixá. This is Our Lady of the Head, a Catholic devotion, and this is Oshun, the mother of the sweet water. So many people here, that was a baptism. We have some baptism, like celebration. And this is another group. This is my personal altar at home. This is Luana and Caramba, who are sleeping next to me here. These are people in our Sangha. That's the tattoo being made. That's our late friend Do was one of our friends, for Paul's friends at the temple. Oh, you know her, Barbara, from the ZPI, our friend. And this guy here, Celso, made a very nice poem that I suppose I can read at the end. And these are friends from the Sangha. This is me, my beloved Anna. Let's see. Maybe we can go back. You see, this is a rooftop in Rocinha. You can see all this around here is the favela. You can see from upstairs. It's a little high. And all the people, Portuguese Sangha. And, well, this is a poem in Spanish that Celso made about what is America for us in that sense and the situation. Maybe you can read the translation that I put there, but what is really interesting, I can give it to Noah later, but the interesting here is the name Abya Yala. Abya Yala is the name of America in one of the Indian languages here. So what we say is that Abya Yala is a place of hope because we are building hope. And here's a koan in Portuguese. I'm going to translate it later, but I'm going to read it in Portuguese for you. Like a koan, it was made by a poet very good called Adélia Prado. And the koan says, cantiga triste, pode com ela é quem não perdeu a alegria. And that means that there is no translation really for that, but maybe we could translate like a sad tune, cantiga triste, a sad tune. Only the person who has not lost joy can deal with it. That's not a good translation. It's just for you to get the sense that the situation here is sad, but only because we didn't lose our joyful nature, our Dharma nature, joyful Dharma nature. We can deal with all the sadness and misery that we see around. And I think that during COVID, not only we had this opportunity of rethinking our practice because of time and forest, but also we could really feel the potency of caring, loving care for people who are with COVID and everything else. I think Brazil maybe is the second place in the world with more people dying. I mean, the first is the United States, but the second is Brazil. More than 600,000 people, more than that died directly from COVID without the other causes that were in a certain way consequences of COVID. So it's really sad that this happened because a great part of that is because of ignorance and also a definite policy of extermination of the government, in the sense that they would minimize the situation and do not give people the means of avoiding the illness. So that was just one more chapter in the genocidal story of the governments here since the 16th century. But the most important thing is that loving kindness and loving care have taught us that the dream is not over. Like, I would like to meet Martin Luther King. Unfortunately, I couldn't meet him in person, but I think that that's the idea of the Dharma, really. That we don't practice Zen to find some kind of ecstasy or enlightenment outside the world. I don't believe the Buddha believed that. I think that he came back from the forest to teach people how to engage in caring for each other. I think that's the biggest message in Zen. Sometimes we mistake that because Zen, of course, is associated with silent meditation, seated meditation. But Dogen Zenji used to say that our life is a Zen. Some people interpret that in a kind of mischievous way. They say that everything they do is Zen because everything is a Zen. And that I don't think that was the idea of Dogen. I think that he said that if we practice Zazen a lot, the perfume of Zazen goes to our lives, our daily life. And then we begin to really flow the paramitas, flow dana, generosity, effort, care, compassion. I think that's the spirit of Zen. And this spirit is very compatible with the native religion. We're talking to the trees, talking with the birds, talking with the forest, taking care of everybody and living in harmony and living in community. I think if you go back to the beginning, Maitreya, the Buddha Maitreya is really community. And I would like to thank my Sangha for being here with me. They are the real makers of this talk. And again, thank you very much for your work, your presence. It's very reassuring. And also thank you, Roshi, for everything. And thank you for keeping Upaya alive and this wonderful place.
Thank you so much, Alcio. I loved that talk and the sense of Zazen perfuming, our work in the world, and how, as we call it, engaged Buddhism can look, like you, a priest in Brazil, doing all these good works. And just the vision of interconnectedness. So I deeply appreciate what you shared. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll close with the 4 great Bodhisattva vows from the Zendo. And just a couple of reminders for everyone. On Saturday, we have a members gathering with Roshi and myself and Kozan and Angmo and Wendy. And we'll just get to meet with our wonderful Sangha of members whoever would like to join. It's kind of open to all members. And if you'd like to be a member, you can come and join. And then on Sunday, Kozan is going to lead Ease and Joy Mornings with Hunt, who's in the Zendo. And we're looking forward to that, the basics of Zazen and how to let it perfume your life, perhaps. Okay.
Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Thanks, everyone. So, Sarah, since you're the host, you'll have to end the